correct me if I'm wrong, but the kids that are born from 1998 to about like 2003, we know what it's like to have a normal childhood.
People often say that there are certain things in life that you only truly learn to appreciate after you've lost them. Most of the time, we focus on moving forward, looking towards the future. But eventually, there comes a time when life forces you to look back. And now Gen Z has reached that point in their lives. But does the Gen Z nostalgia we see all over social media actually belong to Gen Z?
I'm gonna sing Cher Lloyd by Cher Lloyd or Rebecca G. Wright. And don't forget all the trouble that we get.
Why doesn't somebody know how to flush the toilet after they've done a shit?
It wasn't me.
It was fucking one of yours. Disgusting.
Every generation has a point in their life that they are incredibly nostalgic about. For Gen X, that was the 1980s. If you ask your parents, I'm sure they'll rave about AC/DC, Michael Jackson, Madonna, Sylvester Stallone, Back to the Future, leg warmers, scrunchies, punk rock, and VHS tapes. For millennials, it's 1990s, the golden age of Eminem, Tupac, Dr. Dre, and the entire R&B and hip-hop scene, as well as grunge bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and the birth of the 27 Club. The 90s also brought iconic films like Matrix and Forrest Gump, along with hip-hop fashion, oversized jackets, baggy jeans, and sneakers. It was the era of Walkmans and Discmans, the first cell phones, and the baby steps of the internet.
Phone we know today, let's see if you remember or even had these cell phones. The Samsung SCH3500, this is burned into my memory because one of my parents had this phone.
For Gen Z, the nostalgic times would be the 2000s when listening to bands like Blink-182, Green Day, and My Chemical Romance was a thing.
No one understands me. Turn around and die. Turn around and die.
Even though Eminem's career began in 1990s and he's often associated with millennials, he was still massive in early 2000s, which many older Gen Zs remember well from their childhood. R&B also dominated the early 2000s, with artists like Usher, Alicia Keys, Beyoncé, and Rihanna paving the way. Iconic films like Mean Girls, Legally Blonde, The Princess Diaries, Bridesmaids, The Hangover, Shrek, The Incredibles, all of those things were huge, as well as TV shows like Friends and The Office. Of course, the birth of Marvel and the superhero movie boom started here as well. Even though that 2000s saw the rise of the internet and social media like YouTube, Facebook, or MySpace, social media was not readily accessible for many. People mostly used it to communicate and post pictures, and the number of social media users was still relatively small. Smartphones didn't arrive until the end of the decade, so flip phones were still a thing for many. Things started shifting between 2010 and 2015 when many Gen Zers were kids or young teenagers. This led to the explosion of reality TV shows like The Kardashians, as well as the rise of YouTube, video games, and memes. And of course, you can't forget the nostalgic "I'm loving it" commercial. And I can already hear people in the comments arguing that the early 2000s were the millennial time, not the Gen Z time. And you are right, but not entirely. There's a forgotten generation that doesn't really fit into a specific box. Yes, I'm talking about you, the 90s babies. Sometimes it feels like people born in the 90s should have their own generation because they don't really fit into either the millennial or the Gen Z box. They often identify with both because they can relate to aspects of each generation.
Today I learned that I am a zillennial according to Professor Deborah Carr of Boston University. Just for a refresh, millennials are those born from 1981 to 1996, and Gen Z 1997 all the way to 2012. But some young adults relate to both generations. So then the microgeneration of zillennials was born from 1992 to 2002. These are the people that heard about MySpace but never used it, had a Facebook phase, still stuck on Instagram, and a little bit late to the TikTok craze. These were also the kids that were too young to remember 9/11 when it happened. We remember the good old days of playing outside before getting introduced to the Game Boy or the DS, and eventually the internet and the iPhone. But comment what other characteristics should be associated with this generation. This is Jinx the Zillennial, over and out.
In the early 2000s, many millennials were teenagers, and of course, they will relate to that era and try to claim it as their own. But the kids born in the 90s were also kids during that time, so it's definitely their era too. The period from 2010 and 2016, when many 90s kids were teenagers, is their era as well, just like the era of the Gen Zers who were kids or young teenagers at that time and like to claim it as theirs. The thing people tend to feel most nostalgic about are their childhood and teenage years. So if we want to be specific, the years 2000 to 2016 should actually be the most prominent and nostalgic years for 90s kids, also known as Caspers, not the 2000 Gen Zs or 1980s millennials.
We're zillennials. We grew up with technology as well as growing up with a good childhood. We're zillennials. We're too old for TikTok, but we're also too young for Facebook. We're zillennials. We are too old for Gen Z, but we're also too young to be a millennial and relate to any of them. We're zillennials. We grew up with Facebook, but when they had all those games on there, such as Farmville and yada yada yada. We're zillennials. We can't relate to any one sole generation that we had to make up our own. And it honestly makes a lot of sense.
Many older Gen Zs are at that age where nostalgia really kicks in. Being in your 20s and 30s is a decade that marks the end of certain chapter in life. The chapter of being free from responsibilities as a kid or a teenager. And I feel like this is the most difficult decade of life. You've often without money, struggling to make ends meet, trying to find a job, seeking a good relationship, and feeling lost or uncertain about the future. Those feelings often make you nostalgic for the good old days when you were a child or a teenager, feeling on top of the world, able to do anything without a care in the world.
I thought being in your early 20s was like supposed to be fun. I see all these bitches having so much fucking fun. I am miserable. Miserable. To my core miserable. What the fuck? This shit sucks. I'm suing whoever told me that this was supposed to be the most fun time in my life, because it is not. Definitely not. Not even close.
That's when people begin to romanticize the 2000s. The music, the fashion, the films. Many Gen Zers are currently romanticizing the Y2K aesthetic, which essentially reflects the early 2000s style of baggy pants and crop tops, claiming the style of baggy everything as their own, while taking the mick out of millennials and their skinny jeans.
Hey, I got the games!
Oh my god, I forgot to tell you, my Gen Z cousin is here.
Oh! Hey!
Oh. Hey.
Are those no skinny jeans? Wait! Cancel.
If you really think about it, that was primarily a millennial style. A lot of people assume that millennial style was all about skinny jeans, but it actually wasn't, at least not at the start. Many millennials were teenagers or young adults in the late 90s and early 2000s, and baggy pants were absolutely their style. Skinny jeans didn't come into fashion until later, around 2010 and 2016, and even then they made a comeback from the 1980s when influencers and celebrities started embracing leggings and skinny jeans just like they did in the 80s. So the skinny jeans trend, in many ways, it's more of a 90s kid style, even though millennials were still wearing them as young adults during that time.
It's no secret that I think the 2000s is the best era for comedies.
Can anybody tell me what was in the water in the early 2000s when these rom-coms were coming out? Because they have not been able to replicate it since.
Those were the times, many like to claim, when films weren't necessarily politically correct and often included jokes that are rarely found in today's movies because they'd be considered too controversial.
Okay, so there's a genre in the film industry that's been heavily on my mind, and I hope it's been on your mind as well because it's just not the same. And that genre is comedy. I feel like the early 2000s and the late 90s were like the golden eras, like the standout era of all comedy movies, like literally. And I say this because I feel like back then they had more of a connection to the audience because simply, like, take for instance the Scary Movie series. Comedy back then, you could have said anything you want because it was like a parody. So they made fun of celebrities, they made fun of disabilities, they made fun of all sorts of things, and they wouldn't get canceled for it. Whereas today, if you did those jokes that they did in movies now, you would get canceled immediately. And that's why I feel like because they put those aspects of not giving a F inside of their movies, that's why it was a huge success.
That style of comedy actually originated from the 90s films, so the younger millennials and the older Gen Zers, also known as Caspers, are the ones who really lived through that era.
Social media needs to crash for a whole year so people can snap back to reality. Life was so much better before the internet and before social media. Everyone was natural, there was no filters, there was no need for competition. People don't connect the way we used to anymore. Everything's so digital. I miss the days when we used to play outside before the internet. We used to ride our bikes, play jump rope, make prank calls before the caller ID, ring people's doorbell and run away. We used to run around outside and play tag, back when everything was so simple. I miss the days when we used to pass love notes in class and play footsies under the table. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're too young. But man, those were the good old days. This generation is different, and life was so simple back then.
There is a certain sentiment towards that era specifically of early 2000s, and that is because it indicates the end of something that nobody will ever experience again. And that is growing up without social media, without smartphones or advanced technology. It's at the same time a pre-social media and pre-smartphone era and the birth of it all. It was a decade of a massive shift in culture from analog to digital, where offline time was common while with the rise of smartphones, it has become a rarity.
No, it's not time for bed. Chill out. It's 9 o'clock. I am 12 years old. Stop treating me like a baby.
Let's
I'm
go.
not going to bed. We're not going to bed. Can you hear her?
A time with fewer distractions, without the constant barrage of notifications from social media and 24/7 connectivity. People were generally more present in the moment, and sure, technology was still around, but it didn't dictate everything the way it does today. Conversations were more often face-to-face, and events like concerts, dinners, or trips weren't interrupted by the need to check in or document everything for social media. This makes it feel like the final moments of an era without the tech that we now consider essential. The 2010s saw smartphones and social media become fully integrated into daily routines, creating the hyper-connected, always-on world we live in now. While technology and social media has undoubtedly made a lot of things easier, they have also birthed many of the problems we are facing today, such as the friendship crisis or the mental health disaster.
I just spent 10 minutes on TikTok. One guy told me we're all gonna die in 10 years. Another guy wanted to convince me to buy a new camera for 300 euros. Another video showed me how to make 10k a month. Then another girl told me that I need to lose weight and be skinny for summer and how to achieve that. A video telling me to delete social media, a video telling me to start my content creator journey. All in the span of 10 minutes. We are not designed for this.
If you look at how people used to meet in the past and how they meet now, it has changed drastically over the years, leading to more isolation as talking to each other in public has become more and more scarce, along with the growth of social anxiety. Simple tasks like giving someone a phone call or knocking on the door have become real challenges.
Danny, can you call Kevin and set up a meeting for this afternoon?
Yeah, sure. What's the number you want me to text?
Oh, no, I need you to just give him a call.
No, but I don't actually know Kevin, so if I called a stranger, that would be insane.
No, dial the number and you'll get him.
Okay, but what do I say?
You would have a normal conversation as you would to schedule a meeting, yeah.
All right, and before we get into this, there's no Snapchat, there's no DM that you want me to know.
Living through that change has left many nostalgic for times when it was normal to pop by a friend's house without setting a specific date, when it was okay to speak to people on the train, and no one was really busy scrolling through their feed.
It's a little hot in here, but it won't stop us from partying. Isn't that right? All right. Thanks, guys.
Early 2000s was still a time when couples usually met each other in public places like libraries, gyms, bars, cafes, etc. While now most people meet online through dating apps. There's something nostalgic about the idea of meeting someone in public, in a casual outfit and in a casual setting, with no preconceived notions, as opposed to the expectations of perfectly curated social media profile.
I'm so over dating apps, so I'm determined to meet somebody out in real life. That being said, I live in Los Angeles. Where do you meet people in real life?
People also become nostalgic over the sense of community that was once quite strong. But with the rise of technology, cheap travel, and economic boom of megacities, it has become more scarce than ever. Most people spend majority of their time at home on their devices, and going to other people's houses has become a rarity. Organizing cookouts has been replaced with sporadic restaurant outings. Family holidays at home have given way to all-inclusive hotel vacations.
So this is my 4th year in a row spending Christmas alone, so I'm going to show you guys how I make my Christmas dinner. I don't know why I make so much food every year because it's just way too much, especially when I've got nobody to share it with.
And all of these changes make a lot of sense. The rise of technology has made it easier to communicate with people from the comfort of our home. So many have substituted face-to-face interactions for FaceTime and texting. Many younger people are unable to afford their own homes and are often living in shared apartments, making visits to other people's places much less common. Going to restaurants has become one of the few social options, but it can quickly get expensive. So to save money in this unstable economy, many choose to stay at home, as socializing has become quite costly. With the rise of cheap travel options and the ease of relocation, many have moved abroad or to larger cities or states in search of better opportunities for themselves. However, while moving can improve people's financial situation or lifestyle in long term, it can also make visits with family or friends from their hometowns much less frequent. That can make holidays like Christmas feel more isolating and lonely rather than exciting and homely.
I don't think people who have parents realize how lonely it is just living. It is the loneliest thing in the world not having a family around who check in on you. I haven't had a happy birthday text ever. I've never even been sent a card by my family. I'm estranged because my parents were physically and mentally abusive and verbally abusive. I literally cannot be in contact with my parents or any of my family really. And it's lonely.
Every generation has a tendency to romanticize the good old times, and we often look back at the earlier years of our lives through rose-colored glasses, as if everything was simpler, more affordable, and less complicated back in the day. Social media, smartphones, and the internet were new, fun, and exciting, and they weren't causing overstimulation and information overload like they do now.
10 minutes into your day and you're convinced the world is ending, your anxiety's through the roof, you feel lonely, and you haven't even gone outside yet, and then you do go outside and the sun is shining, people are smiling and laughing, the birds are chirping, absolutely nothing is wrong.
The early 2000s weren't really the good old times for a lot of people. In fact, they were years of unrest and uncertainty, both globally and in many people's personal lives. 9/11, the war in Iraq, and a major global economic recession, during which many lost their jobs and livelihoods. Many people struggled to keep up with the rapid rate of technological change and were often left behind. So while many things were different, many of the problems adults faced back then were not all that different from the problems we face today. Young millennials and older Gen Zs are young adults now, meaning they beginning to face many of the same challenges that Gen X and millennials dealt with in early 2000s. With the challenges of modern life, political unrest, economic uncertainty, and rapid technological advancements, it's easy to look back on the early 2000s or 2010 and feel a sense of comfort. It's easy to do so when in those years you were a kid or a teenager, completely unaware of everyday struggles.
What? This place is crazy.
And I know this may be a bad time right now, but you owe me $32,000 in legal fees.
What?
Looking back on simpler times and feeling nostalgic about them is a form of escapism that most generations experience at some point in their lives. However, the true sense of Gen Z nostalgia may still be on the horizon as Gen Zs grow older.
Humans have a cognitive bias called rosy retrospection, which basically means you look at the past as the good old days, even if they actually weren't. I struggle with this all the time. I always look at the past and think, damn, like life was so good back then. If you've ever heard of the phrase rose-tinted glasses, this is what it means. It means looking back at the past favourably. And don't get me wrong, being nostalgic about good times is okay. But the issue is, you can think about the past as the good old days so much that it starts to consume your present. Our judgment just gets clouded by this bias over time. So if you're ever thinking about the past too much or you're getting sad, just really try and remember how you felt back then, because it might be that those memories weren't as good as you remember.